Here, the SML News UG brings you the whole presentation of Ambassador Ambrose Olara Otunnu, Uganda's candidate for the UN Secretary-General job. We hope you enjoy the view.
I call to order the informal meeting to conduct an interactive dialogue with Mr. Olara Otunnu, candidate for the position of the United Nations Secretary-General.
Even though we must keep our view firmly on the three pillars of UN action, from time to time the flow of events will shape priorities and emphasis. Today we are in a situation of major conflicts around the globe. These conflicts must constitute a particular priority for the Secretary General. Engaged, present, probing, listening, seeking opportunities to suggest a way out, all recognizing that in the end the decision will be on the part of the parties in conflict and the major players. I especially have in mind the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, the Great Lakes region of Africa, Sudan, Iran, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel. One of the most disturbing features of the situations I refer to is the fact that innocent civilians, particularly women and children, are disproportionately affected by these conflicts. It is one of the reasons why we cannot stand still. We must do everything within our powers to act. Over the years, we have continued to emphasize the importance of human rights. In the words of the Charter, fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. These are the words of the Charter. And we must return to the basics in terms of the regime of human rights of which I speak. The basics as postulated in the Charter. For a human rights approach to be credible and enjoy broad legitimacy, every effort must be made to guard against politicization, instrumentalization, and the intrusion of ideology in our pursuit of human rights. There should be greater sensitivity to different cultural perspectives and social norms. The UN must better understand and acknowledge the deep traditions and cultures of human dignity, respect, and social cohesion that exist in many societies. This, in part, will be my approach for rebuilding consensus on the issue of human rights back to the basics. For the United Nations to discharge the responsibilities set out in the Charter, let me say this clearly and simply. Reform is no longer an optional choice. It is an imperative. Without it, the institution is at grave risk. We cannot continue to do business as usual. To do so would be a grave mistake and error of judgment. Key to the organization's success is its legitimacy, effectiveness, and efficiency. And therefore, the reform initiative subsumed under UN 80 must not only be continued as a priority of the Secretary General, but be a continuous process that becomes part of the DNA, the outlook, the culture of the organization. Every organization that wishes to be at the cutting edge, vibrant and viable, must consistently bring review and constantly. Madam President, as Secretary General, I would put priority on harnessing the incredible force which is being unleashed by artificial intelligence to make this a force for good for the entire world community with access and benefit for all. I have, over the last 5 years, been based in northern Uganda. And when the calls and messages asking me to consider to be a candidate for this position came, I was in northern Uganda. What was I doing there? Many of you will recall this is a part of the world that was radically destroyed, collapsed, as a result of over 20 years of the LRA war. So I've been engaged with others in the enterprise of rebuilding, of restoring, of resuscitating a terribly broken society. I have some idea what peace building means at the ground level. And I believe that United Nations should make it its business to enunciate policies and standards from New York and Geneva and Vienna, but also follow to see the impact on the ground at the national and community level. And finally, Madam President, what I offer, if I'm given the opportunity to be Secretary General, is broad and very deep experience of working across all the 3 pillars of the UN. It is a track record of building consensus and offering innovative solutions in times of deadlock and crisis. And I would just, Madam President, please end on this note because this inspires me. It is St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. I would embrace this role with the same passion, commitment that I've shown in every leadership position I've had here. I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Otunu. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegation wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Interventions should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. As before, time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoff. A timer will be projected on screen. To assist speakers to observe their time limit, their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before the time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes for questions from delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes from delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. I will remind candidates, I would remind you, Mr. Otunu, also to stick to your speaking time limits. I will hand you over a card. You don't have automatic microphone cutoffs, but to have a fair and transparent process for everybody else, I would kindly ask you to stay within the time limit. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Qatar on behalf of the Arab Group, followed by the European Union and Nepal.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. We are honored to speak on behalf of the Arab Group, and we thank Mr. Olara Otunnu for presenting his vision and priorities for this position. We reaffirm our availability to work with the candidate to enhance the organization's ability to deal with the current challenges and to further establish sustainable development and the UN Charter principles. We have the following questions. First, with regards to the differences in the implementation of international law between countries, what do you think about the issue of non-selectiveness in order to enhance the credibility of the multilateral system and enhance the reliability of these standards? Second, how will you work on increasing the effectiveness of the efforts of the organization with regards to the question of Palestine in order to implement relevant resolutions and obtain a sustaining peace? Third, we see an increase in conflicts and challenges related to the respect of international law and to the UN Charter. How do you propose that this adherence should be strengthened and to enable UN organizations such as UNRWA from fulfilling their roles? Fourth, as for the liquidity crisis and the regression in development efforts and the issue of rising debt, how will you work on the development pillar and advance the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda and provide help for developing countries? Fifth, what is your opinion on the reform of the Security Council? Which mechanism do you think would be most effective? And what is your opinion also on the expansion of the Security Council and the use of veto? Sixth, how do you view the UN 80 initiative and its possibility and effects on the organization? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar on behalf of the Arab Group. Just as a reminder for everybody, we have 3 hours. You can also come back to some of the questions if it's not possible in the time limits. Please, Mr. Otunu, you have the floor.
First, on the reform of the Security Council. Very important project, very historic project. The primary responsibility falls on member states, especially the permanent members and the other members of the organization, to continue working, discussing, and come up with a consensus that is viable. But as Secretary General, I would very much encourage this and underscore the fact that there's some historical imbalance that needs to be corrected, but there should be a consensus that is forged between the permanent members and the rest of the membership. Development continues to be exceedingly important. And indeed, I'm concerned that we don't seem to be on track on current indications for fulfilling the SDGs. Particular emphasis should be put on garnering more resources, on encouraging developing countries to assume more responsibility within their own countries so that we perform better on the SDGs than we did on the Millennium Development Goals, with which I was very much involved. On the UN Charter and the principles in the UN Charter, these principles are for the entire United Nations and the entire membership. And indeed, they should be applied, they should be invoked, they should be promoted without any selectivity whatsoever. That goes for our promotion of human rights, broadly speaking. It goes for promotion of international law, broadly speaking. We should go back to the basics, I said earlier, but once at the basics, we should not be selective in the application of these values and norms. Thank you. Yes, on Gaza and Palestine, you heard me say that among the conflicts on which I would focus immediately because of the unacceptable level of suffering and tragedy is the Gaza situation. But we should not stop at ending the current phase of the conflict, it's exceedingly important that we begin as a matter of priority to address the root cause of the problem and have a long-term solution to this problem. I say a little bit more in my little vision statement on this matter. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Otunu, for sharing your vision with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. At this critical juncture, the United Nations needs a Secretary-General who can build trust, reduce polarization, and bridge divides. Someone who can mobilize collective action, accelerate UN reforms, and deliver solutions that make a real difference in people's lives on the ground. It also needs a Secretary-General that is fully prepared to defend and promote full respect for the UN Charter and international law, and all three pillars equally. We emphasize this last point because the EU's support to the UN reflects precisely that premise. We support all strands of the UN's work equally. On peace and security, we actively advance the implementation of key UN mandates through our security and defense missions around the world. On sustainable development, we provide close to 50% of all ODA and over 1/3 of all voluntary contributions to the UN system, safeguarding the SDGs and battling inequality. And on human rights, we are committed to protecting and defending all human rights, civil and political, economic, social and cultural, with equal vigor. And we are therefore deeply concerned with recent normative attacks on human rights, including on women's and girls' full enjoyment of human rights and on gender equality, as well as racial, religious, political and other forms of discrimination and persecution, and also with the fact that, remarkably, only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates. It's a clear imbalance between the three UN pillars. So against this backdrop, I'd like to ask the following question. As Secretary General, how would you plan to protect and increase the funding of the human rights pillar as explicitly mandated in the Pact for the Future? And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. First, as I said earlier, all the three pillars of UN engagement are important. And one of the pillars is obviously human rights, enunciated in the very charter of the organization. At the moment, I know that expenditure on human rights is exceedingly low, so I would explore all other avenues permissible that would make it possible to increase funding for human rights activities. But that must be in the context of what I said in my remarks, that we reform the institution, we go back to the basics on the issues of human rights, and we apply them without any selectivity. That's the basis on which I would act. But I would definitely press member states to provide more resources for the work on human rights. And all the other comment that you made, Excellency, about trust, the importance of the UN Charter and the principles, international law, the importance of being clear with mandates, absolutely I'm in agreement with those.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries, followed by the Republic of Korea and the next or first civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of least developed countries, the countries that are recognized as the most structurally vulnerable and yet the furthest behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The LDC group would like to thank Mr. Otunu for the presentation and kindly request to share his observations on the following two questions. First, if elected as Secretary General, what will be your strategic approach to mobilize and direct adequate, predictable, and concessional resources to LDCs? And how will you reorient the UN development system so that supporting LDCs to achieve the SDGs becomes a visible system-wide priority at the country level? Second, In the face of ongoing financial constraints, how will you ensure that resources and dedicated support to LDCs, including to the LDC dedicated UN mechanisms, are protected and strengthened rather than reduced? And what specific measures will you put in place to ring-fence the support from across the board cuts? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you, Excellency. There are two sides to this ledger. First is the responsibility of the least developed countries in the first instance to make sure that their houses are in order, that there is adequate planning, that there is local investment, mobilization of resources, that one is fighting corruption. That then provides the legitimacy, the moral grounds on which the Secretary General can go knock on other doors to mobilize resources to support the efforts at the national level. And the knocking on doors should not only be the multilateral institutions that we know, the international financial institutions, but also there are now increasingly important role being played by the private sector. And the Secretary General will be at your disposal to do everything he or she can to mobilize resources to support your efforts at the national level.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, also on behalf of Austria, Egypt, Ghana, Myanmar, Norway, Peru, Portugal, and Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Otunu, for joining us today. I have the privilege of delivering these questions on behalf of the 9 member states, which the Norway, Sweden, Myanmar, Australia, Peru, Egypt, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, and Portugal, that have had the honor of having their nationals serve as Secretary Generals of the United Nations. Drawing on our experience and the institutional memory, we wish to contribute constructively to the current selection process and stand ready to support both the process itself and the next Secretary General. The responsibilities entrusted to Secretary General under the chapter are profound. While the chapter designated the Secretary General as the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization, it also assigned the office an independent political role in the maintenance of international peace and security. As complex conflict continue to unfold across the globe and calls for reform of the organization grow ever stronger, the United Nations require a Secretary General who can successfully navigate both the political and managerial dimensions of the role, equal parts of diplomat and advocate, civil servant and CEO. As a member state that had honor of having their nationals serve as Secretaries General, our questions are: first, the office of the Secretary General frequently requires difficult judgments between principle and pragmatism, public advocacy and quiet diplomacy, action and restraint. In your course of your career, have you faced a situation in which you have to make such difficult judgment? What lessons and principles from your experiences would guide you as Secretary General? Second, drawing on the experience of the previous Secretary General, what lessons do you believe remain most relevant for the next Secretary General? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea on behalf of those countries having had the Secretary General. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We must begin with principles, but we don't stop at principles. We must see what can work, what is practical, and probe and forge consensus where possible. So I do not see principles and advocacy as being in conflict. There are a continuum of action. Secondly, Excellency, yes, I have been in some very difficult situations which are very much analogous to what you are referring to. In the Security Council, I referred earlier to the deadlock of 1981. In the General Assembly, we had the crisis of Grenada in 1983. I was the chair of the Credentials Committee and had to find a way to build a consensus and to get out of that deadlock. When I was building the regime for protection of children and women in situations of conflict, same, discussing with Security Council members to incorporate this on the agenda of the Council. So yes, I have been in such situations. I have experience of how you navigate in this difficult situation and come up with an inventive solution based on consensus you have built.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the first civil society organization, Civicus, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Jesselina Rana, representing Civicus. Mr. Otunu, your vision statement speaks of human rights, financing for development, environmental prosperity, and of connecting the global to the community. Yet, you do not mention civil society, an essential partner in connecting global institutions to local communities. This matters more now than ever. We are witnessing the global deterioration of civic space, anti-rights voices increasingly co-opting human rights language and UN spaces, and states continuing to flout international law and violate human rights with impunity, even as we expect a severely under-resourced human rights pillar of the UN to respond effectively to these challenges. If selected Secretary General, and in the spirits of we the peoples, what principal steps would you take to strengthen the UN's relationship with civil society, ensuring we are not simply consulted, but meaningfully engaged in shaping your leadership priorities in upholding international law? Thank you.
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you very much, Madam. I would do two things. First, the Secretary General must do everything to reconnect the people of the world to the United Nations. The United Nations is primarily an association of member states, but the member states and the UN collectivity are acting, in the words of the Charter, in the names of the people. So the Secretary General should promote the ideals of the UN, invite the people of the world to be connected to it, give them hope, give them faith. The UN should not be an ivory tower divorced from the people of the world. Secondly, you heard me say how important it is for us to move from the global to the community, enunciate aspirations and policies and values which are important, but take them down and follow them down to their impact at the national and community level. My own experience, I think I mentioned a little earlier, the last 5 years, have been engaged in the womb of the community, and a very difficult enterprise of rebuilding a society devastated by war and encampment. So yes, not only do I believe in this, I hope the Secretary General will be somebody who is comfortable at all these levels, from the global to the national to the community. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Rule of Law.
Madam President, Excellencies, I have the honor to deliver this question on behalf of over 50 cross-regional members of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law, and would like to thank Mr. Otunu for his presentation and answers provided so far. Excellencies, in recent years, we have witnessed breaches of even the most fundamental provisions of the UN Charter, including the obligation of all member states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force, as well as mass atrocities committed at large scale in grave breach of international law. All this paired with the failure of the Security Council to take action in response. So the questions of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law to you would be: what concrete, proactive and preventive measures would you personally pursue, if elected as Secretary General, to strengthen the rule of law and prevent breaches by member states of the Charter's principles and of international law? what specific preventive diplomacy initiatives would you launch or strengthen? We look forward to the exchange, and I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the group of friends on the rule of law. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Excellency, thank you very much for your question concerning not just the provisions of the UN Charter, but rule of law across the board. As I said earlier, it's very important when we're talking about norms and standards and principles which have been agreed upon at the United Nations that we should be even-handed, we should be non-selective. Nowhere is that more important than in the role of the Secretary General, because the Secretary General should be the custodian, the advocate, the voice for these principles and norms we are talking about in a way which is very impartial. And sometimes the Secretary General may say it publicly, other times the Secretary General may take it up quietly behind the scene. On other occasions, the Secretary General might find a way to convene a small group to discuss this. There are various instruments available to the Secretary General to perform his or her role as the chief advocate, the main voice for the norms, the principles, the rules we have agreed upon. And that would be the way I would approach this matter. Very important, very important.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, followed by Uruguay and the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President. And I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, which is Poland, Ukraine, and my own country, Lithuania. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine continues to undermine the foundation of the international rules-based order. It has been accompanied by credible and well-documented reports of serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including the deportation of children, widespread attacks against civilian infrastructure, and arbitrary detention. These acts are not isolated incidents, but rather form patterns that demand a consistent and principled international response. At the same time, this situation has exposed important limitations within the current multilateral system. While a range of UN bodies and international mechanisms have been mobilized, challenges remain in ensuring effective coordination, preserving evidence, and ultimately delivering accountability. Strengthening collective actions across institutions is therefore essential to prevent impunity, uphold international law, and maintain trust in the UN system. Against this background, we would like to raise the following questions. How can coordination between the Security Council, the ICC, the General Assembly, and other UN bodies be improved to help prevent impunity? How can UN better support cooperation with international and national investigations to document and preserve evidence of war crimes in Ukraine? What practical role can the Secretary General and his good offices play in supporting the implementation of General Assembly resolutions, such as the resolution Return of Ukrainian Children of 3rd December 2025, and advancing accountability in this situation? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative from Lithuania on behalf of the Lublin Triangle. Please, Mr. Otunu.
I thank you, Excellency, for your question. The Security Council of the United Nations, the ICC, and all other entities of the UN which deal with standards and rules and resolutions of the UN should not accept impunity, should do everything to stop or discourage impunity. So that is clear, and it's not just for the ICC, the Security Council, for all the UN bodies. Secondly, I think you've heard me say explicitly that among the situations of conflict that I would address right away, engage in right away, see what the UN can do would be the situation in Ukraine. I have also said, you heard me say earlier, that one of the most disturbing scenarios today is seeing that in all these conflicts, children, women, innocent people are suffering unbelievably. It's another reason why we cannot be indifferent. We must do everything to try to bring these conflicts to an end, because the toll, the tragedy on innocent people is unacceptable.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China.
Thank you, Madam President. The group attaches great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirms the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. In this regard, we wish to raise the following questions to Mr. Otunu. First, on the UN80 initiative introduced by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal, and how do you believe it could advance a UN that is more effective, efficient, and delivers greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reforms fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the UN, preserve the balance among its three pillars, and do not come at the expense of development mandates or other priorities of developing countries? Second, on financing for development, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the UN system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support financing for development in a manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries, particularly at a time of shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps? Third, on geographical and gender balance, how would you as Secretary General ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geographical balance as prescribed by Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation of unrepresented and underrepresented countries, especially from developing countries, at the senior level appointments within the UN Secretariat and the broader UN system? Fourth, on the UN financial situation, what concrete measures would you as Secretary General undertake to promote compliance with Member States' financial obligations and ensure that assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions, particularly in light of the record level of arrears owed to the organization? Madam President, the Group of 77 in China underscores the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, while ensuring the provision of equitable and effective support to the representations of all Member States in the discharge of their responsibilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 in China. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. The Secretary General and the Secretariat must always be impartial, independent, respectful of Member States, and listening patiently to the Member States, and of course implementing the decisions of the Member States. It is very important, Excellency, that the United Nations should be the United Nations of inclusion. The United Nations should, even in its bureaucracy, look like the world it represents. So it is very important that whether in terms of geography, in terms of cultures, in terms of gender, the UN should look like the world it represents. It should be very inclusive. Financing for development, as I said earlier, and also in my little vision statement, I elaborate on this, that first, I insist the responsibility begins at the national level, that the national authorities should assume responsibility for their development and do the right thing. Then the Secretary General can help to knock on doors that can bring more resources, and not just those which have been part of the official multilateral development funding or even bilateral development funding. There are other possible sources now available, and the Secretary General should knock on all of them to mobilize resources for countries which have done well to put in place the plan, the arrangements for their development. On the issue of reform, reform, as I said earlier, is no longer an option, it is an imperative. But reform is an imperative precisely because we want the good work which the UN has done in the past and continues to do now to continue. Reform should not be the ending of multilateralism, but the strengthening of multilateralism to make it more effective, have more impact, and have the UN of service. That is the purpose of reform. And it's also the reason why it mustn't be a project determined in time, but an attitude change, a transformation, a new culture that we install within the UN system. And then finally, I say that UN 80 is a wonderful basis on which to conduct reform. A good deal has been done. Much more needs to be done. We need to deepen what we should do. We need to consolidate programs and activities. We need to look more carefully at mandates to make sure that they are clear, that there are resources for carrying them out. There's a whole range of things we can put. But let me just say finally, Excellency, that in my experience, we could agree on 5 or 6 things which are critical to be done, experts and member states and the bureaucracy. But I think what has been lacking perhaps is the will to carry through what we have agreed upon. And I hope the next Secretary General will provide the leadership when member states have agreed with him or her on what should be done, that those things are carried through and implemented.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union, followed by the next civil society organization and Andorra.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank Mr. Otunu for sharing his vision. I speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We align with the statement delivered by the European Union. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary General who, 1, can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, and 2, who can act as a strong convening power across all 3 pillars, and 3, who can proactively contribute to prevention, peacebuilding, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence. We place high value on leadership that can connect the UN's development work with broader efforts on peace, security, and human rights, particularly in times of systemic stress. In your vision, Mr. Otunu, you state that the next Secretary General should shepherd genuine and lasting reforms, with member states taking responsibility for coherent mandate creation, implementation, and review. What concrete steps would you take to encourage member states to align mandates with resources and to reduce duplication while preserving the UN's ability to respond to emerging needs? Finally, Mr. Otunu, could you kindly share your early thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including the Deputy Secretary General? How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, on the team around me, I would ensure that I have the most talented team possible, and that team reflects the membership, the cultures, the geography that compose the United Nations. Fortunately, talent is available across the globe, so that should be possible to do. On the issue of power and the role of the Secretary General, let me just say this. I say it in my vision statement, that the Secretary General does not wield conventional power. That is by design. The Secretary General has soft power that flows from two streams. The first is the principles of the Charter. He or she is the guardian of the principles of the Charter. And the second stream is the support of member states. When the Secretary General has these two, he or she has soft power, a platform on which to do some important things. I said earlier that reform should not be the ending of multilateralism. On the contrary, reform should strengthen multilateralism and give it the legitimacy it needs now, and the capacity to deliver better on the function, the role that is set out for the UN in the Charter. In terms of my leadership, I think everywhere where I've had the opportunity, whether within the UN or outside the UN, I brought a certain amount of rigor. I brought a certain amount of making sure that those who may have competing views are brought together. I put particular premium on coming up, not being shy, to propose inventive and innovative solutions. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the Light Millennium Charitable Global Human Advancement Organization. Please, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, and Mr. Candidate, the UN Charter promises sovereign equality to all nations. Yet, aggressive states violate national sovereignty to seize resources, destroying human rights, vital ecosystems, and irreplaceable cultural heritage with total impunity. The double standard erodes global security and UN credibility. Under UN 80 reform, my question is, if elected, what specific measurable actions will you take when a nation violates another sovereignty? And how will you use Article...
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, and I think how we will use the power of the Charter to implement it. If there is a violation, please, Mr. Otunu, you have the floor.
Well, Madam, the UN Charter is explicit about this. It is explicit about forbidding infringement of national sovereignty in whatever form. So the Secretary General should stand on those principles, invoke them, promote them, encourage them. And even when they are being violated, the Secretary General should be engaged in seeking to restore the status quo ante, in seeking to restore and make sure that these principles are being observed. That is very clear. The Charter is very clear on that. What I would only add is that the Secretary General should be consistent, should be non-selective, and should be even-handed and impartial in invoking these principles and these values of the United Nations.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors, followed by Switzerland and Palau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President.
And I thank you, Mr. Otunu, for presenting your strategic vision. And you spoke in French at the beginning of your presentation. We appreciate that. At a time when the UN is facing systemic crises and growing fragmentation of the international order, we believe that the issue of multilingualism is not a secondary one. The strategic lever to strengthen legitimacy, effectiveness, and inclusiveness in the multilateral system. We'd like to hear your personal position and your ability to bring this issue to the highest levels. Could you clarify in your UN work the role that you would place on multilingualism in your background and how you've come here? If you are elected Secretary General, how do you plan to make multilingualism a pivotal element of your leadership and not a simple functional tool? How will you ensure that your team's composition effectively represents linguistic, cultural, and geographic diversity at the UN? And lastly, with regard to your responsibilities when it comes to Secretariat governance, how do you plan to improve HR management to ensure that linguistic skills are fully recognized and given value during recruitment and progression processes in accordance with the requirements of linguistic diversity in Secretariat? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you, Excellency. You know, language is not just about communication. Language is a window on our society. Language is a badge of identity of a society. So languages, and all our languages, very important. In my prepared remarks, which I didn't read, I say more about the importance of multilingualism and promoting that within the United Nations. I believe in that very strongly. I come from a continent where there are many languages and where, you know, some of the more international ones are French, Arabic, Swahili, Hausa. There are many, many languages. So I believe that we should promote multilingualism and have the UN as much as possible reflect the world that it is composed of.
I thank Mr. Otunu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group, followed by Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this dialogue, and thank you, Mr. Otunu, for presenting your vision. Good afternoon, colleagues. I speak on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, a cross-regional group of 27 member states committed to a transparent and accountable UN. We have two questions. The ACT Group has developed a code of conduct regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. This code of conduct urges Security Council members to pledge against voting no on credible draft resolutions aimed at preventing or halting genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, and encourages all Council members to take timely, decisive action during mass atrocities. It is supported by 130 member states. How do you see the SG's role in promoting the implementation of this code of conduct? And the second question, the selection and appointment process for the SG is fundamentally a joint process between the Security Council and the GA. But it is not the only area where they have a complementary mandate. How do you see the role of the GA in the maintenance of international peace and security? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group. Please, Mr. Otunu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, in terms of a joint process, the design of the UN Charter was to have the two bodies work in very close cooperation. And I think we should do everything to restore that the General Assembly and the Security Council work very closely together. Because the full membership is very important. The 15, including the 5, are also very important. So we really should have a cooperation between the two bodies. Now, the General Assembly initially did not have the role of peace and security. But that changed a little bit with the Uniting for Peace resolution, I think 1950. Very rarely used, very sparingly used, but it exists. But the most important thing is we should try not to enlarge polarization and tension within the UN as a body. It's one body. We should promote cooperation. And as Secretary General, I would be a go-between if there was any kind of tension to make sure that I bring the General Assembly, the Security Council, to some kind of cooperation. It is for the benefit of the institution. And I have good experience in working in both. Now, in terms of the code of conduct of which you speak, you know, all my adult life, I have been engaged in the vineyard of promoting human rights. From the time we resisted Idi Amin in Uganda as a young person to this day. More than that, you know that here at the United Nations, it fell to my lot to design, persuade Security Council members, and incorporate the regime for protecting children in situations of war. It is operational to this day. And from that, other mandates have now been added. So these are matters which are very close to my heart, which speaks to my experience, and where I have some idea what to do, where, and with whom.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Singapore and Australia.